Welcome to the tale of a profound and hedonistic story by Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray is a young man of extraordinary beauty, which is captured in a painting by his friend, the artist Basil Hallward. For 2 months, Dorian has been posing for Basil, who is utterly fascinated by him and cannot stop looking at him each day as he provides endless inspiration for his work. Youth smiles without reason. It is one of its greatest charms. The painter muses as he works. One day, Dorian meets Lord Henry Wotton, an eccentric aristocrat who believes that pleasure is the only thing worth theorizing about. Basil is concerned as he considers Dorian an innocent person, and Lord Henry very persuasive. There is no such thing as a good influence. All influence is immoral from a scientific point of view. Dorian indeed listens with amusement to Lord Henry, who makes him consider things he has never contemplated, things that surprise him, like the importance of the senses, of the soul, and of the fleeting youth that Dorian enjoys. Lord Henry tells him that youth is not eternal, and he must take advantage of it. When Basil finishes the portrait, he feels that its destiny cannot be a sale or an exhibition. He believes he has pulled too much of his own soul into it and decides to give it to Dorian as a gift. Basil shows Dorian the painting, and he is astonished by the revelation of his own beauty, but at the same time, he feels a certain resentment, which soon turns to anger. He exclaims, "I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful, but this picture will remain always young. It will never be older than it is on this particular day of June. If it were only the other way, if I were to be always young and the picture to grow old, I would give my soul for that." From that day on, the relationship between Basil and Dorian changed. Dorian now spent more time with Lord Henry, whom he found charming, amusing, and terribly immoral. A month later, our protagonist visits Lord Henry at his home and tells him he has fallen in love. Day after day, he goes to the theatre to see an actress named Sibyl Vane, who only performs Shakespeare. He tells him that on his 3rd visit to the theatre, he approached her dressing room. Upon seeing her, he realized that Sibyl was unaware of her own talent. He saw that she was not entirely capable of separating real life from the stage, as she preferred to call him Prince Charming. This purity and naivete were indescribably charming to Dorian. He was madly in love and told Lord Henry that he adored Sibyl and that she was all that mattered. Dorian convinces Lord Henry to go with him to see her perform as Juliet the next day. He also invites Basil, feeling guilty for having ignored him for weeks, as he appreciates the masterful portrait he painted, despite being a month younger than our protagonist. That same night, at 12:30, Lord Henry receives a telegram from Dorian. "I have become engaged to Sibyl." At her home, Sibyl Vane tells her mother that she will marry her Prince Charming, but at that moment her brother James enters to say goodbye, as he is leaving for Australia as a sailor. On hearing the conversation, he tells Sibyl to be careful and swears that if Prince Charming ever harms her, he will hunt him down and kill him. That night, Dorian, Basil, and Lord Henry arrived late to the theatre, which was unusually full. Lord Henry criticizes the place, calling it a vulgar and ugly den of iniquity. When Sibyl appeared on stage, Basil, Lord Henry, and Dorian admired her beauty, but it soon became evident that for some strange reason, Sibyl was giving a dreadful performance that night. Her acting was artificial and talentless. The audience began to hiss and speak ill of the actress. The moment came when they started to leave. Lord Henry suggested they abandon the theatre as he could not stand the scandal. When the performance ended, Dorian went into his fiancée's dressing room. There she was, looking happy. But instead of returning her affection, Dorian chose to berate her for her terrible performance, humiliating her and insulting her. He rejected her when she tried to approach him. Sibyl told him that ever since she had known love, she had forgotten everything, which is why acting no longer mattered. Her life was now not the theatre, but him. Dorian called her response stupid, and despite her pleas, left, breaking off the engagement and never wanting to hear from her again. He wandered the city all night, and when returning home and seeing his portrait, which he was beginning to hate, he saw that the face of the young man depicted had changed slightly at the corners of the lips, a gesture of satisfaction, but also of perversity, of malice. He covered the painting with a screen and went to sleep. Our protagonist awoke, regretful for having scorned Sibyl, and decided to forgive her and resume the engagement. He checked his mail, which contained many invitations to different events, and a letter from Lord Henry, which he did not read, sensing it would tell him something he did not want to hear. He wrote a letter to Sibyl, begging for her forgiveness, and looked at his portrait again, where he recognized a second change. The painting had a sinister look. Lord Henry arrived to see him and told him Sibyl had committed suicide by ingesting poison. Dorian couldn't believe it. He had decided to marry her, to beg her forgiveness. He began to suspect the portrait and how it was capable of revealing his actions. What concerned Lord Henry was the scandal and Dorian's reputation. He proposed going to the opera so no one would link him to the girl's death. Oscar Wilde explores the delusions of vanity in a dark and complex novel where he uses the pictorial fantasy to symbolize the degradation of the human soul. All of this is surrounded by the stridency of Victorian London, described with his mordant and elegant poet's pen. Basil later visits Dorian to console him for his fiancée's tragic death, but is disappointed to learn that Dorian had not attended Sibyl's funeral and instead spent the night at the opera. For a moment, he thought Dorian was heartless. Then the artist asked to see the portrait he had painted, but Dorian flatly refused, as Basil would realize the sinister change. Dorian even threatened Basil with ending their friendship right there and there, so Basil gave up, for his feelings for Dorian were very strong. When his friend left, Dorian felt a certain agony and fear. He was paranoid, nervous, and decided to hide the painting in a room that had been locked for years, and for which only he held the key. It was the room he had inhabited as a child, and it would now be occupied by that monstrous entity the painting was becoming. At Dorian's request, Lord Henry sent him a book. This novel was controversial because it encouraged a surrender to pleasure. It was deeply hedonistic, with a cult of youth, perversion, and beauty. Dorian takes this book as a guide and begins to lead a libertine life of indulgence and pleasure. Time passed, and Dorian Gray realized that he was not aging, that his wounds left no scars, and that his sorrows did not weigh on him. Looking at the painting, he thought he was observing the corruption of his own soul. He soon understood that it was the portrait that was aging and bearing the ugliness of his sins. The years went by, and Dorian Gray remained obsessed with old age and death. To escape these thoughts, he devoted his time to distracting himself with different activities like perfumery, music, jewels, embroidery, and tapestries. And in all those years, there was not a single day that he did not go up to see his portrait, which he now deeply hated. On the evening of his 38th birthday, Dorian was returning home after a dinner when he saw his friend Basil in the distance. He preferred to avoid him and continue on his way, but Basil recognized him and came over to talk to him. He told him he had come looking for him, wanting to say goodbye, as he was moving to Paris for 6 months. Basil notices that Dorian has not aged in all these years and expresses his concern about the rumors spreading in London about our protagonist's reputation. It is said that by day, he behaves like a gentleman, and at night, in a horrible manner. All those who have associated with him have ended miserably. Dorian confesses that he has acted wickedly, that his soul is corrupt, and decides to show Basil the painting. Dorian and Basil went to the room where he hid the portrait. They crept up the stairs so as not to wake the servants. A gloomy room awaited them. The painting was covered with a blanket. Dorian removed it, and Basil could not believe what he was seeing. He could not recognize his own masterpiece, but he saw his signature on the portrait. He did not want to acknowledge the hideous canvas. He thought it must be due to the room's dampness or some poison that had destroyed the painting. Basil sank down into a chair and realized that the disfigurement of the image showed the immoral life of his friend. He lamented having venerated him for so long, when Dorian was nothing more than a cruel person. Basil urges Dorian to repent, but our protagonist can only feel hatred. He grabs a knife and murders Basil, stabbing him in the neck. After this, Dorian stealthily leaves his house and returns in the early morning to have an alibi.
The next morning, Dorian woke up very calmly and without any remorse. That day, he sent for the chemist, Alan Campbell, who had been a friend of his, and gave all the staff the day off. When Alan arrived, it was clear he still held a grudge against Dorian. The last time they saw each other, things did not end well. Our protagonist then tells him that there is a dead person in the room upstairs, and wants Alan to help him dispose of the body using some chemical. At first, Alan refuses, but Dorian blackmails him as he had a letter in his possession that incriminated the chemist. Alan went upstairs to do the job. When he finished, he came down pale but calm. He told Dorian that he hoped this would be the last time he ever heard from him, and left. When Dorian went to check the dismal room, Basil's body had indeed disappeared. There was a strong smell of nitric acid, and he noticed that the painting had changed again. The grotesque figure in the portrait now had blood-stained hands. Our protagonist was feeling down. He took a cab and paid the driver with a gold coin to take him to the docks. The cab arrived at the port, and Dorian made his way toward an opium den. His soul was truly mortally ill. He had spilled innocent blood. But even if forgiveness was impossible, forgetting was still possible, and he was determined to forget. He ordered a brandy, but was a prisoner of his thoughts and guilt, seeming to see Basil's eyes staring at him. A couple of women approached him, recognized him, and began to harass him. So Dorian threw some coins on the ground to get rid of them, and one of them said, "There goes the one who made the pact with the devil." "Damn you," Dorian replied, and the other woman added, "He likes to be called Prince Charming." Dorian tried to leave the place in a hurry when a sturdy hand suddenly grabbed him by the throat. He struggled until he got free and then saw a burly, angry man. It was James Vane, the brother of his suicidal fiancée, Sibyl. He told him that 18 years ago he had destroyed his sister's life. But our protagonist came up with a ruse. He asked James to step into the light and showed him his face, which was that of a 20-year-old. Then Dorian told him that he had never known his sister, that it was impossible. The confused sailor apologized and let him go. A week later, Dorian Gray visited the conservatory at Selby Royal. There, in a word game with Lord Henry and the Duchess, he admitted to having bad memories of his nickname Prince Charming. At that moment, Dorian looked at the window and saw the face of James Vane spying on him, and he fainted right then and there. Afterward, he locked himself in his house thinking that James Vane was watching and hunting him to kill him. On the third day, Lord Henry entered Dorian's room, where he found him weeping. To distract him, he recommended attending a hunting party. There, in the middle of the hunt, the person next to him saw a shadow in the trees approaching menacingly and shot with his shotgun, mortally wounding a man in front of Dorian. This accident unsettled our protagonist. He told Lord Henry that he sensed something horrible was going to happen to one of them, and Lord Henry replied that the only horrible thing was boredom. Dorian ordered a train ticket to flee London, but at that moment, the head gamekeeper arrived visiting to tell him about the accident. He said no one knew the corpse and that he looked like a sailor. Dorian went to see the lifeless body of the murdered man. It was James Vane, which calmed our protagonist, who let out a shout of joy. He left the morgue with eyes full of tears. He was finally safe. After the events with James Vane, Dorian thought about mending his life. He also learned that Alan Campbell had committed suicide in his laboratory, and Lord Henry, with whom he was talking, had ended up getting divorced. The friends recalled Basil and the portrait he had made of Dorian, which was a masterpiece. Lord Henry recalls that Basil's murder was a vulgar act, as the painter had no great possessions, typical of the lower classes, and they had been deprived of the beauty of his art. When the friends said their goodbyes, Dorian said that Basil was a good friend and that he would change to become a good person, to which Lord Henry laughed and told him he had always been good. Dorian thought about how his life would change when he became good, but even though James Vane was now in an unmarked grave and could not avenge his sweet sister Sibyl's death, or Alan Campbell had committed suicide and there were no more witnesses to the death he had caused Basil, Dorian's conscience pursued him. It was as if the portrait was accusing him. He arrived home and went up to the gloomy room to see if the painting had changed. He removed the purple cloth covering the canvas. A cry of pain and indignation escaped his lips. No change was visible, with the exception of a glint of cunning in the eyes and the winding wrinkles of hypocrisy at the mouth. The canvas remained as hateful as ever, if that was possible, and the scarlet dew that stained the hand seemed brighter, more like freshly spilled blood. Dorian Gray began to tremble. Were his vanity, selfishness, and hypocrisy the reason for his deplorable acts? He thought as he looked at the portrait's devilish eyes and its monstrous wrinkled fingers dripping blood. What did this accursed portrait want? A confession? Did it mean that he was going to confess his crime? That he was going to turn himself in to be executed? He burst into laughter. The idea seemed monstrous to him. He looked around and saw the knife with which he had stabbed Basil. It gleamed, giving off flashes. In the same way that he had killed the painter, he would kill his work and all that it stood for. He would kill the past. He would put an end to that monstrous life of the soul, and without its hateful warnings, he would regain peace. He gripped the weapon, and with it stabbed the portrait. A cry shook the entire house, and when his servants entered the room, they found the splendid painting of a beautiful young man, just as he was on the first day he had been painted. On the floor of the room lay the corpse of a hideous old man, unrecognizable, distinguished only by the ring belonging to its owner, Dorian Gray. And that was the summary of the novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Tell me in the comments if you feel the protagonist's concerns about old age, beauty, and death are legitimate. If you want to support me, you know you can like the video or subscribe to the channel. And if you want to help me continue uploading videos, you can buy my book, The Spectacle of Life, with the details in the description. Hugs, and until next time.